They seated me in a quiet corner of the ballroom, a deliberate afterthought amid the glittering chandeliers and the laughter that floated like music above the clinking glasses. The polished marble beneath the towering floral arrangements reflected the soft glow of candlelight, but I had nestled myself in the shadows, deliberately invisible. Linda Matthews, the quiet mother of the bride, blending into the background as if she were part of the decor rather than the centerpiece of this day. It was a role I had mastered over the years, being seen but unseen, a ghost in the grand parade of celebrations. My daughter Rachel was the opposite of invisible. She floated through the crowd dressed in ivory lace, her smile radiant and full of hope, her eyes bright with the kind of optimism only youth and love can provide. Beside her stood Daniel Pierce, her new husband, his charm polished to a shine that could disarm the most skeptical. He moved through the room with effortless grace, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, his smile genuine enough to ease the heart but practiced enough to hide the calculating mind beneath. I watched him closely, noting the subtle shifts in his demeanor, the glances that lingered a moment too long, the quiet dominance in his posture that suggested he measured every interaction as if strategizing a game only he could see. The guests mingled around us, a swirl of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, their laughter a backdrop to the unspoken stories weaving through the room. I caught snippets, congratulations, well wishes, and the usual chatter about the future. Yet beneath the surface of celebration, I sensed a tension, an undercurrent of ambition that had nothing to do with love or happiness. Daniel's polished interactions weren't just about winning hearts tonight, they were about securing something far more valuable. I shifted in my seat, my fingers resting lightly on the clutch in my lap. The secret I guarded was heavy, though no one here suspected its weight: $10 million. That was the inheritance left to me by my late husband, Robert Matthews, a fortune carefully hidden away from prying eyes and greedy hands. It wasn't just money, it was a legacy, a safeguard for Rachel's future, and a shield against the kind of manipulation I had seen too many times before. I kept it secret because I knew the dangers that came with wealth, especially when it was tied to family and marriage. Daniel's charm was a mask, and I had learned to read masks well. As he moved through the crowd, his smile changed subtly depending on the company, warm and engaging with the wealthy relatives, polite but distant with the distant acquaintances, and something sharper, more calculating when speaking to those who might be useful in his plans. I saw it in the way he lingered a little too long near my sister-in-law, who handled Robert's estate, and the quick, almost imperceptible nod he gave the financial advisor from the bank. They didn't know I was watching, but I was cataloging every move, filing away every hint like a detective piecing together a puzzle. Rachel laughed nearby, her joy genuine and unguarded, unaware of the currents swirling around her. She believed in Daniel, how could she not? He was everything a young woman dreamed of, handsome, successful, and attentive. But I had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and the brightest smiles often concealed the darkest intentions. My heart tightened as I watched her, caught between pride in the woman she had become and the protective instincts that urged me to shield her from what I suspected was coming. The room buzzed with toasts and well wishes, the clinking of glasses punctuating the evening's rhythm. Yet amid the celebration, I remained an island of calm, my mind working beneath the surface. The $10 million inheritance was not just a number, it was a fortress built by Robert's foresight and my husband's careful planning. I had kept it hidden for a reason, because I knew that once certain people discovered it, everything would change. Daniel was already stepping closer to that line, testing the waters with subtle remarks and veiled suggestions that hinted at ambitions beyond marital bliss. I caught his eye across the room once and he smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a challenge wrapped in civility, an invitation to a game I wasn't sure I wanted to play but knew I had to master. I returned the smile with practiced sweetness, the kind that concealed steel beneath velvet. He didn't know it yet, but I was no ordinary mother-in-law, and this wedding was only the beginning of a story far more complex than anyone here realized. The music swelled as the newlyweds took the floor for their first dance. Rachel's eyes sparkled with happiness, and Daniel held her close, his grip firm but tender. Around them, the guests melted into the moment, swept up in the romance and the promise of new beginnings. But I saw beyond the dance, the calculated steps, the unspoken plans, the moves rehearsed long before this day. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles tickling my throat, and allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. This was my stage now, too, the quiet observer who knew secrets and held power in silence. I would play my part with patience and precision, guarding what was mine and protecting Rachel from shadows she could not yet see. As the evening wore on, the conversations swirled around me like a gentle storm. Daniel navigated the room with ease, securing alliances and planting seeds of trust that I knew would be tested. I listened, cataloged, and planned. The inheritance was safe for now, but I would need to be vigilant. Robert's foresight had given me the tools, but it was my resolve that would determine the outcome. I glanced once more at Rachel, radiant in her bridal glow, and felt a surge of determination. This night was a beginning not just for her marriage but for the battle ahead. I was ready, not just as a mother or a widow but as the guardian of a legacy too precious to lose. And as the chandeliers sparkled overhead, I vowed silently that no charm or calculation would ever be allowed to threaten what Robert and I had built. The quiet strength I carried was invisible to most, but it shone as brightly as any diamond in the room. Tonight, I was not just Linda Matthews, mother of the bride. I was a sentinel, watching, waiting, and ready to defend the future. The next morning, as sunlight filtered softly through the draped curtains, I found myself alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. The wedding's sparkle had faded into memory, replaced by a gnawing unease that clung stubbornly to my thoughts. Daniel's polished smile was still etched in my mind, not the one shown to the guests, but the one I glimpsed just beneath the surface, quick and sharp like a blade hidden behind velvet. He appeared then, unexpectedly, as if summoned by my silent vigilance. "Morning, Linda," he said smoothly, slipping into the chair across from me. His charm was intact, but the glint in his eyes was different, less warmth, more calculation. "I hope the reception didn't wear you out." I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral. It was lovely. Rachel was radiant, of course. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She's lucky to have you. I wanted to talk, just the two of us." His tone was casual, but the weight behind the words made the air in the room thicken. "I think it's important we discuss our family's futures, especially now that Rachel and I are joined." I set my cup down, steadying the slight tremor I felt. The phrase "our family's futures" was a carefully chosen invitation, one loaded with implications. Daniel wasn't here to exchange polite words. He was testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses. "Of course," I said evenly, masking my wariness. "What did you have in mind?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "I've been thinking about ways we can consolidate resources, family assets, investments, that sort of thing. It makes sense, doesn't it, for Rachel and me to build a strong foundation together." The words hung in the air, innocent on the surface but laced with something deeper. Daniel knew more than he let on. He was angling for access, and I could feel the first crack in the delicate facade of the day before. "I understand the importance of securing the future," I replied cautiously, "but these conversations require careful thought. Family finances are complex." His smile tightened just a fraction. "Naturally, I'm not suggesting we rush anything, just that we start talking early for Rachel's sake." I nodded, keeping my voice light. "I'd be happy to meet and discuss it further, perhaps over coffee where we can talk more privately." Daniel's eyes flickered with something like satisfaction. "Perfect, let's do that." The arrangement was simple, yet it marked the beginning of an intricate dance. I knew I had to uncover his true motives without revealing my own position. The coffee meeting was a test, a way to gauge how far Daniel would push and how much he already knew. When we met the following afternoon at a quiet cafe tucked away from the wedding's lingering echoes, I watched him closely. His demeanor was relaxed, but his questions were pointed, probing beneath the surface of casual conversation. So, Linda, he began smoothly, stirring his coffee, I've been thinking about how to support Rachel and our future family. Access to certain financial resources would make that possible. He paused, gauging my reaction. It's not just about day-to-day expenses, it's about investments, opportunities, ensuring stability. His words were carefully crafted, blending concern with subtle entitlement. He spoke as if those resources were already a given, masking his presumption beneath a veneer of partnership. I met his gaze steadily, my voice calm. I appreciate your commitment to Rachel's well-being, Daniel, but managing family finances is a delicate matter. It involves trust, transparency, and understanding. He nodded, leaning forward. Exactly, that's why I want to be involved. There was a flicker of impatience in his eyes, quickly covered by a smile. I want to help secure a future where Rachel doesn't have to worry. The implication was clear. He expected access or at least influence. I weighed his words carefully, sensing the ambition that propelled them. It confirmed what I had feared. Daniel's intentions were not purely about love or partnership. He was already positioning himself to control, to gain. Yet I spoke softly, deliberately. I'm sure Rachel values your support, but these decisions require more than good intentions. They require full transparency and respect for existing arrangements. He shifted in his seat, a subtle sign of irritation betrayed by the tightness around his mouth. Of course, I'm not trying to overstep, just trying to find a way to contribute meaningfully. I smiled faintly, masking the calculation behind my eyes. Meaningful contribution is important, but it must be built on trust and mutual respect. I'm sure we can continue this conversation with those principles in mind. The meeting ended cordially, but I left with a clear understanding. Daniel's ambition was no longer hidden behind charm. He wanted access, control, and he was testing the waters carefully. Back home, I sat at my desk, the quiet hum of the house a stark contrast to the storm swirling inside me. I pulled out Robert's will and the associated trust documents, their pages worn from years of careful review. These legal structures were Robert's gift to me, a fortress designed to shield our family's wealth from just this kind of threat. I spent hours poring over the fine print, confirming the safeguards that protected the inheritance. Robert had anticipated the dangers, crafting barriers that required multiple layers of approval and strict oversight. The inheritance was mine to control, not to be handed over lightly, and certainly not to be manipulated by a son-in-law with ambitions beyond his means. Yet knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed counsel, a trusted ally who understood the intricacies of family wealth and the subtle maneuvers of those who sought to exploit it. The following day, I reached out to my attorney, Margaret Fields, a sharp and discreet woman who had guided me through Robert's estate affairs. During our meeting, I explained the situation carefully, omitting nothing. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly as I detailed Daniel's behavior and the implications I suspected. I'll review everything, she promised, including his background. If there's anything questionable, we'll find it. True to her word, Margaret began a discreet investigation, uncovering financial difficulties lurking beneath Daniel's polished exterior, debts, failed ventures, and a history of entanglements with dubious partners. The pattern was consistent: a man who had targeted wealthy families before, weaving himself into their lives to gain control of their fortunes. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Daniel's ambitions were clear, as was his method, but I was prepared. I had the law on my side, and I was no stranger to the art of quiet defense. In the days that followed, I began to craft a strategy not just to protect my inheritance but to test Daniel's true character. I would engage him, yes, but on my terms. I would listen, observe, and wait for the moment when his intentions became undeniable. For now, I remained calm, the calm before the storm. Rachel's happiness was fragile, and I intended to shield her from the shadows gathering just beyond the light of this new marriage. Daniel had made his first move, but the game was far from over. As I closed Robert's will and looked out the window at the soft autumn leaves drifting in the breeze, I reminded myself, appearances could deceive, but truth, like fortune, was safeguarded by vigilance and resolve, and I was ready to fight for both. Late one evening, as the house settled into a hush, I found myself once again poring over Robert's carefully drafted documents. His handwriting, neat and deliberate, seemed to whisper reassurance from the pages. The will, the trust agreements, the layered protections, each a brick in the fortress he'd built to shield our family's legacy. I had always known Robert was meticulous, but tonight, under the weight of recent discoveries about Daniel, his foresight felt nothing short of prescient. I traced the lines detailing the trust structure. It wasn't a simple inheritance, it was a complex web of legal safeguards designed to prevent impulsive decisions or opportunistic claims. Control was firmly in my hands, but only with the proper counsel and oversight. There were provisions requiring multiple approvals for any significant withdrawals or transfers, and clear stipulations about who could benefit and under what conditions. Robert had envisioned threats beyond natural family disputes. He had prepared for calculated intrusions like the one I now faced. The next morning, I reached out to Margaret Fields, my attorney, whose sharp mind and unwavering discretion had been a steady compass through the labyrinth of my late husband's affairs. "Margaret," I said, "I need you to take a closer look not just at the trust but at Daniel Pierce. I want a full background check, financial history, business dealings, anything that might shed light on his character." Margaret's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I'll assemble a team, we'll dig deep but quietly, no need to alarm Rachel or cause a scene before we have the facts." Within days, the results arrived and they were telling. Daniel's financial records painted a troubling picture, a pattern of instability, failed ventures, and a tendency to associate with dubious partners. There were inconsistent reports of debt accumulation, business failures cloaked in plausible explanations, and whispers of questionable dealings that had never quite reached the public eye but were known in certain circles. Margaret leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "This isn't just luck or bad timing. Daniel's history suggests a pattern targeting wealthy families, marrying into them, then maneuvering to gain access to their assets. It's a classic scheme." I let the words settle, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The polished man at the wedding was, in reality, a skilled opportunist, a wolf in tailored clothes, but I wasn't about to let him have the last word. Armed with this knowledge, I began shaping a plan. It wasn't enough to protect the inheritance on paper. I needed to test Daniel to see how far he would go and to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. I arranged meetings with Margaret and financial advisors discussing scenarios and contingencies, crafting a strategy that balanced caution with assertiveness. One afternoon, I sat with Margaret reviewing the trust's protective clauses. "Robert's work is thorough," I mused aloud. "But we have to assume Daniel will push boundaries. We need to reinforce these protections, make sure there are no loopholes he could exploit." Margaret nodded. "We'll implement additional oversight, third-party audits, stricter controls on access to accounts, and legal warnings about any attempts to circumvent procedures. If Daniel tries anything, we'll have documented proof." The thought of legal battles was exhausting but necessary. Rachel's future, our family's legacy, depended on it. Meanwhile, I maintained a careful facade around Daniel, engaging him in conversations that felt innocuous but were, in truth, probing and revealing. I listened for slips, watched for signs of impatience or entitlement. Each meeting was a delicate dance, a test of his true intentions cloaked beneath polite exchanges. At a recent luncheon, Daniel mentioned a new business opportunity, a venture that required capital infusion. "It's promising," he said smoothly, "but we'd need access to more substantial funds. Rachel and I are committed to making it work." I smiled, masking my skepticism. "Ambition is admirable, Daniel, but financial decisions of that magnitude require thorough review and consensus." He nodded, but I caught the flicker of frustration behind his eyes. He was pressing, testing the limits. I could feel the tension rising, and it only confirmed the path ahead. One evening, I confided in Margaret about my concerns. If Daniel senses resistance, he might escalate. We have to be prepared for that. Margaret's response was steady and reassuring. We'll monitor closely. The key is to document everything. Transparency is our ally. I also began discreetly gathering information from acquaintances and mutual contacts, carefully piecing together the mosaic of Daniel's past. The more I learned, the clearer the image became. A man adept at manipulation, skilled in charm, but ultimately motivated by self-interest. Through it all, I kept Rachel shielded, preserving her trust and happiness. The last thing I wanted was to cast shadows over her new marriage prematurely. But I knew that knowledge was power, and I was gathering it quietly like a sentinel preparing for the inevitable storm. At home, I reinforced my own resolve. Robert's legacy was not just about money, it was about protection, foresight, and love. I had been entrusted with a sacred duty, and I would not falter. As the days blurred into weeks, I found strength in the meticulous preparations and the quiet support of trusted advisors. Daniel's ambitions would not go unchecked. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with knowledge, strategy, and a mother's unwavering determination to protect her daughter and her family's future. I invited Daniel to the house under the guise of discussing joint family investments, a neutral, even generous pretext designed to draw him into my carefully laid trap. The afternoon was warm, sunlight filtering through the tall windows of the study where I had arranged the meeting. The room was orderly, the scent of fresh jasmine from the garden mingling with the faint aroma of aged leather-bound books lining the shelves. Everything was in place, the setting for a conversation that would shift the balance of control. Daniel arrived punctual, his smile polished and easy as always. He shook my hand firmly before settling into the high-backed chair opposite my desk. I could see the subtle calculation in his eyes, the anticipation masked by practiced charm. "Linda," he began smoothly, "I appreciate you taking the time. It's important we align our visions for the future." I nodded, returning the smile that concealed my resolve. "Absolutely, Daniel. Transparency and trust are vital, especially when it comes to family finances." I leaned forward slightly, setting the tone. "There's something I need to discuss openly." I paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. "I'm aware, Daniel, of your financial troubles, the difficulties that have followed you before your marriage to Rachel." His expression flickered, a brief shadow crossing his features. Quickly, he masked it with a polite smile. "I prefer to look forward, Linda, not backward." I held his gaze steadily. "That's admirable, but it's important you understand I'm fully aware of your past, your failed ventures, the debts, and the patterns that suggest a history of financial instability." He shifted uneasily but said nothing, his hands folding tightly on his lap. I reached into a folder I had placed on the desk earlier, sliding it toward him. "We've done our due diligence. My attorney and advisors have uncovered a consistent pattern business dealings that raise serious questions about your intentions." Daniel's eyes narrowed briefly as he scanned the documents, but his voice remained controlled. "You're making assumptions, Linda. I'm here because I want to build a future with Rachel." "And I want that too," I replied, my tone firm but measured. "But I won't allow manipulation or exploitation. I have evidence, Daniel, of your attempts to access the family inheritance improperly." He leaned forward, a flicker of anger breaking through his polished exterior. "That's unfair. I'm trying to support Rachel. Why would you think otherwise?" "Because actions speak louder than words," I said calmly. "Your attempts to consolidate assets without full consent, your covert inquiries, it all points to a strategy designed to gain control, not partnership." I reached beneath the desk, pulling out a discreet recorder I had set in place before the meeting. The small red light blinked steadily, unseen but capturing every word. "I'm prepared to take legal action if necessary," I continued, my voice steely. "Manipulation will not be tolerated, and I have the means to protect what is rightfully ours." Daniel's facade cracked for a moment, his confident mask slipping to reveal frustration and perhaps fear. He straightened abruptly. "You're overstepping, Linda. This will damage Rachel." "I'm protecting her," I said quietly. "And if you care for her as you claim, you'll respect my position and cease these attempts." He rose, the room suddenly charged with tension. "This isn't over," he said, voice low but threatening. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I met his gaze without flinching. "I know enough to stop you." As Daniel left, the door closing softly behind him, I felt a surge of relief tempered by the knowledge that the battle had only just begun. The recording was secure, a safeguard for the inevitable escalation. In the days that followed, Margaret and I reviewed the transcript. The evidence was clear, and we prepared a formal warning letter outlining the consequences of any further attempts to interfere with the trust and inheritance. The letter was sent through certified mail, a firm message delivered without fanfare but with unmistakable authority. Daniel's reaction was a mixture of retreat and defiance. He pulled back temporarily, but the subtle undercurrents of his ambition persisted. Margaret advised vigilance, and we tightened the legal measures around the estate, reinforcing oversight and access controls. During this period, I noticed a change in Rachel. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed slightly as she began to sense the fractures beneath the surface. I chose my moments carefully, supporting her without revealing the full extent of the conflict. The truth was a delicate thing, and I wanted her to discover it on her own terms. One afternoon, Rachel approached me hesitantly. "Mom, has Daniel been acting differently? I feel like there's something I'm not seeing." I took her hands gently. "Sometimes love can blind us to things that are hard to face. I'm here for you always." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, trusting my quiet strength. Meanwhile, Daniel's retreat was brief. He resumed his efforts, more cautious but no less determined. My team monitored his moves closely, ready to respond. I had transformed from the silent observer at a wedding to the proactive guardian of my family's legacy. The confrontation had shifted the dynamics, laying bare the stakes and the players. As evening settled one day, I sat by the window, reflecting on the path ahead. Daniel's ambitions would not be realized, not while I stood guard. The fight was far from over, but I had revealed my hand, and the message was clear. I was prepared to defend what mattered most, with every resource at my disposal. Daniel's retreat was short-lived, but the damage was done. The warning letter from my attorney had rattled him, but it didn't extinguish his ambition. It only made him more cautious, more covert in his maneuvers. Yet beneath the surface, his carefully constructed facade began to crack. Margaret and I continued to monitor closely, our vigilance unwavering. It wasn't long before Daniel's past indiscretions surfaced beyond our private investigations. A few discreet inquiries to financial associates and former partners unearthed stories of unethical schemes and broken promises, now coming to light through legal disputes and mounting debts. News traveled fast in those circles, and the whispers reached Rachel's ears. One afternoon, Rachel confronted me. Her voice trembled with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Mom, I had no idea. I thought Daniel was different. How could he hide all this from me?" I reached for her hands, steadying both her and myself. "Sometimes love can blind us to inconvenient truths, but now that you know, we can face this together." The truth was difficult but necessary. I saw in Rachel's eyes a dawning realization, a painful but vital step toward clarity. It was a turning point. She could no longer ignore the fractures beneath the surface of her marriage. With Rachel's growing awareness, the dynamic shifted. She began questioning Daniel's intentions more openly, seeking answers he struggled to provide. The cracks widened and the tension became palpable. Meanwhile, I channeled my energy into something more constructive, a way to transform this painful experience into empowerment. Drawing on a portion of my inheritance, I established a family foundation dedicated to supporting women's financial independence and educating families about protecting their assets from manipulation. The foundation was more than a symbol, it was a mission born from experience. I wanted to create a shield for others like Rachel, women who might one day face the same threats, armed with knowledge and resources to defend themselves. As the foundation grew, stories poured in, women reaching out, sharing their struggles, seeking guidance. I listened, advised, and built a network of experts committed to prevention and protection. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Within my own family, the foundation became a beacon of hope and resilience. Rachel found purpose in contributing to its efforts, channeling her pain into advocacy and education. Our relationship strengthened as we faced the future side by side, united by a common cause. Daniel's presence diminished, his schemes thwarted by legal scrutiny and the unyielding defenses we had put in place. Though the wounds remained, healing began. I realized that I had transformed from a silent observer into a guardian not only of my family's legacy but of a broader mission to protect others from similar fates. The inheritance was no longer just a sum of money, it was a tool for change. As I watched Rachel speak at one of our foundation's events, sharing her story with grace and courage, I felt a quiet pride. Together, we were rewriting the narrative from deception and betrayal to strength and empowerment. The journey was far from over, but the path was clear. We were no longer victims but advocates, defenders of truth, and guardians of legacy. And in that, I found a new kind of peace. The applause echoed softly through the hall as Rachel stepped down from the podium, her voice steady and clear as she shared the story that had once threatened to unravel us. I watched her from my seat, the room filled with women and men alike, some with eyes heavy from their own battles, others bright with hope sparked by our message. This foundation, born from pain and perseverance, had blossomed into a beacon of empowerment. And tonight, it felt like more than just a gathering, it was a testament to how far we had come. The journey from the wary mother at a wedding reception to this moment of shared strength had been long and winding. I remembered the days when Daniel's polished charm masked his true intentions, the quiet meetings behind closed doors, and the careful unraveling of his schemes. But more than that, I recalled Robert's foresight, his meticulous planning that had given me the tools to fight back when it mattered most. As Rachel rejoined me, her eyes met mine with a mixture of gratitude and resolve. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for standing by me, for never letting me face it alone." I squeezed her hand gently. "You were never alone, and now neither is anyone else who walks this path." The foundation had become our legacy, a living testament to resilience and vigilance. Through workshops, legal clinics, and outreach programs, we had reached hundreds, teaching women and families how to recognize manipulation, secure their assets, and reclaim control over their futures. The work was hard, sometimes exhausting, but it was deeply meaningful. In the months that followed, my advocacy took me beyond the foundation. I was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with lawmakers. My message was clear: elder fraud and financial exploitation were not just personal tragedies, they were societal crises demanding urgent attention and decisive action. One chilly morning, I found myself seated before a Senate committee, the weight of the moment pressing down like the heavy drapes behind me. The room was filled with politicians, journalists, and advocates. As I testified, I spoke not only of my experience but of countless others who had been silenced by shame or ignorance. I urged lawmakers to impose stricter penalties and to expand educational programs, emphasizing that prevention was the most powerful tool. Across the room, reporters scribbled notes, capturing every word. I could feel the shift happening, the beginning of systemic change fueled by stories like ours. Then came the news that brought a quiet satisfaction: Daniel's parole hearing. After years behind bars, he sought release. I submitted a formal statement detailing his unchanged nature, the danger he posed, and the lasting impact of his actions. The parole board, swayed by evidence and testimony, denied his release. It was closure of a kind, but also a reminder that vigilance must continue. As I left the hearing, I felt a renewed commitment to the cause that had become my life's work. Recognition followed, not the kind sought for vanity, but the kind that affirmed purpose. Awards, invitations, and heartfelt thanks from survivors reminded me that our battle was far from over. But each victory, each story transformed, was a step toward a future where deception held less power. At home, Rachel and I rebuilt our trust layer by layer. Our relationship, once strained by secrets and suspicion, grew stronger through honesty and shared purpose. Together, we envisioned a future safeguarded by wisdom, resilience, and unwavering vigilance. Sitting in my study one evening, I reflected on the journey. The quiet widow seated behind a floral arrangement at a wedding had become a symbol of strength and advocacy. Robert's legacy lived on not just in dollars and documents, but in lives touched and futures protected. The war against elder fraud and financial exploitation was far from over, but I was ready, armed with knowledge, courage, and a community bound by shared resolve. My mission had transformed me, and in that transformation, I found purpose. As the candles flickered softly and the night settled around the house, I whispered a vow to the shadows that once threatened us: they would never find easy prey here again.